In this video, we're going to learn how to take a hand-drawn sketch, a croquis, and then we're going to add fabric and color to it in Photoshop. So here's an example of an original sketch, which is done with a fine black pen. And then this is the final artwork we're going to get. And then these are the fabrics that have been scanned that we're going to use. So when you create your own drawing, you're also going to do the same thing. You will create a drawing that's hand rendered. Make sure that all of the areas are closed so that you will be able to use Magic Wand to make selections. And also make sure that the background is white and clean and that you have a good contrast and good thickness of the line. But don't make the line too thick. If you want, you can also use a brush marker and you can pre-color some of the areas. Like in this example, the skin was colored with the marker and the hair and the brush marker was used, and then the color and the texture was added in Photoshop. Here's another example. So in this case, the sketch was actually photographed and then it was cleaned up in Photoshop. And then here you can see the final result where the color, the background, and the texture was added. So let's begin with the demo. So you're going to need a Word document called Vanner's Croquis Demo. So this is basically the step-by-step instructions that I'm going to go over. And you're also going to need to download Vanner's Croquis Demo zip folder, which contains JPEGs we're going to be using. So I'm going to double click to expand the folder, and now I will be able to use these images as I work. When you are working on your own drawings, you would have to scan your sketch using 300 pixels per inch, and you can scan it as a JPEG or you can scan it as a PDF, but make sure that you're using 300 pixels per inch, and make sure you draw this sketch on 11 by 14 page. Then for your fabrics, you can either scan them, and if you have a very big piece of fabric, you can also even photograph it, but make sure that the lighting is even. And you can also photograph your sketch if you don't have access to your scanner. So in this case, I have photographed this sketch, and it's a little bit yellowish, but we can fix that in Photoshop. And also, if you have used your camera or your phone instead of a scanner, that could still work, but you would just want to make sure that you connect to your computer with a cable, because if you email yourself the sketch from your phone, the resolution will get worse. But if you connect with a cable and download it directly onto your computer using the cable, then the resolution will be much higher and better quality. So preferably you're going to use the scanner. Seneca has scanners available in the Computer Commons, but if you prefer to use your phone, you could do that as well. It could still turn out really good, and I'm going to explain how you can make sure that even if you use your phone, how you can make sure that it'll still turn out really nice. So now that I have all of these images done, ready and downloaded, then I can select the Vanner's Croquis scan JPEG, and then I'm going to go to right click, open with, and I'm going to select Photoshop, and then the image will come up. The other thing I could have done is just go to File, Open, and then select this JPEG and open it. Next, we're going to go to Image Canvas Size, and we're going to make it 8.5 by 11, which is basically the letter size. So Image Canvas Size, I'll go here and say 8.5, and here I'll say 11. Make sure it's saying inches. I want the canvas to be added evenly all around, so the dot is clicked here in the middle, so it'll evenly go all around the scan. And then the background extension color, I will select white. Then I will click OK. So here's my correct canvas size. Next, I'm going to go to Image Adjustments image adjustments, brightness, contrast. So image adjustments, brightness, contrast. So I could decrease the brightness and increase contrast, so the whiteness will, so white areas will become more white, and then I can click OK. So depending on your original sketch, you can play around with this, but usually adding more contrast will just clean up the grayness of the image, and then I'll say OK if I'm happy. The other thing that you can do, I'm going to just go undo this. I can also go to image adjustment, replace color, and get rid of the darker background this way as well. So to show you how that works, I'm going to use the other scan, which is a lot more darker and dirtier looking. So just to quickly show you, you could go to image adjustments, replace color. Using the eyedropper, you're going to click here. You're going to increase fuzziness to 200. So it'll select all of the pinkish yellowish tones, 200 fuzziness. And then you basically just have to increase the lightness to be all the way up, plus 100. And then you can say OK. So that's what you can do if you have a really dark, dirty image that you photographed. That's how you can clean it up. But in my case, the scan is pretty good, so I don't have to go to image adjustment, replace color. I can just play around a little bit with contrast and brightness. And then once you're happy, then you can continue. So next step, I'm going to use eyedropper tool, select white, and then use the brush tool to clean up if there's any dirty areas on my sketch. So this sketch is not so bad, but I see a few mistakes that I want to clean up. So using the brush, I can just click here and get rid of the dirty bits. And there's a dirty bit here. If you have made a mistake in your sketch and you want to clean that up, you can also just use the brush set to white. And then you can just clean that up as well. In this case, I may want to have hardness to be 100 so I can get a sharp edge when I'm cleaning up my sketch. If, for example, you have made a mistake and you didn't close your line properly, then that'll be a problem because the magic wand will spill out. So if I went to use the magic wand here, then see it's selecting the leg and the boot, but really I just want to select the boot. So if you have any breaks in your sketch, that's going to create a problem. So in order to fix this, you can either rescan the whole thing, or you can double click, select black, and then go back to your brush, and then you can select, you can try 2 pixels, and then if you click and then press shift and click again, it'll give you a straight line. So I'm using the brush to just fix any breaks that I might have. So you can obviously make sure that you have no breaks before you begin, but in case if you do have any breaks, you can again go back and fix it. So click, shift, and then it'll give you like a straight line. So you can just check your image and make sure there's no breaks. You can also do so by selecting the magic wand and then click everywhere and see if it's going to spill. So it's not spilling out, it's selecting each closed off area. So I'm happy with this, and then I can move on to my next step. So the first thing, I'm going to rename this. So I'll double click on the layer name and I'll call it main. Please remember to never fill any color and never paint inside of the main layer. So the main layer will be used only to make selections using the magic wand. And then once you have selected an area that you need, then you will create a new layer and then paint the color inside. So that way main will just remain black and white. There will be nothing, no color in it and no texture in it. Next, I'm going to use my I'm going to use my magic eraser tool. Oh, here we are. This is the magic eraser at the bottom. So you're going to click on that and then click here to get rid of the white pixels, and then click here to get rid of the white pixels. So now I'm seeing the checkered board, which indicates transparency. So that means if I put a photograph of of the ocean or whatever I want to use as my background, then that's going to show through. So we'll get to the background a little bit later on. So my next step is going to be to select her jacket. So I'm going to use the magic wand. I will click here. I will press Shift to add to my selection, and then I will select this side of the jacket as well. So I want to color that in. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and then I will open the fabric number 1, or I can just go here, click on the thumbnail, and then go to right click, open with, and then I'll open this with Photoshop. So once you have the fabric number 1 opened, then we're going to crop the image to keep the area we need. So I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool. Then I'm going to click and drag from here and a little bit below that top area. And then I'm going to go to image crop. So this is what I want to keep. Also, just to remind you, I could have used the crop tool as well. I would do the same thing. So next, I have to go to Image, Image Size. I'm going to turn on the resample. I'm going to change it here to make sure it says %. And then here I'm going to put 30%. So I want to make it to 30% so it'll be much smaller. Then I'll click OK, and now it did become much smaller than before. So the reason why you want to do that is because you want to change the scale of the tile to be much smaller than the original scan, so that it'll look small enough when it's put inside of your illustration. So that way the proportion will be logical when it's put inside of your illustration. So the next step will be to go select all or Command A, and then you're going to go down to Edit, Define Pattern. And then this is called Fabric 1, so I can just keep that, and then I'll say OK. So now I'm going to go back here. So my jacket is already pre-selected, and now I'm going to create a new layer. Remember, I have to create a new layer because I cannot paint inside of the main layer, because the main layer is used to make selections. So I'm going to make a new layer. I'll call it Jacket. And with my selection being active, I'm just going to go to Edit Fill. I'll select from the drop-down menu Pattern. Then I'll click here and I'll use my pattern. So this is the new pattern that I made, Fabric 1. Then I'll click OK, and then it'll fill it. So you can see the scale is probably still a little bit too big. I could make it even more small, but I'm going to say this is okay, and then I'm going to leave it. Then next step is going to be to lock the transparent pixels. So if I click here, that'll lock the transparent pixels. So what that means, the computer will only allow me to paint inside of the area which contains pixels, and I will not be able to paint outside where there's no pixels. So that means that I can now add shading. So I'm going to click on the brush tool. I'm going to make it 100. I'm going to make the hardness 0, meaning the brush will be very, very soft. I'm going to increase the size of the brush. Yeah, this seems fine. And then I'm going to make the opacity much lower so that I can get a nice soft effect. And then I'm also going to change it either to normal or to multiply. So if I change it to normal, I'm able to add shading. See how I'm adding a little bit of shading. If I add paint using multiply, then I'm going to get a slightly different effect. It'll basically add up the pixels from underneath and then add the new pixels that I'm adding, but at the same time it'll take into consideration the pixels that were underneath. So that's the difference between multiply and normal. I mean, the best way is to try it out so then you can see the difference yourself, but you can see that it's only painting inside of the area that contains pixels, and that's because I locked transparent pixels. The other way to add shading would be to use burn tool. So as you know, burn tool will make it darker, but if you do that, I would just select midtones. I mean, you can play around with the shadows and highlights, but I'm going to select midtones. You can make the brush a little bit bigger in this case, and I can also make hardness to be 0 to have a soft brush, and I can lower the exposure to have a softer effect. So here it's just basically making the area darker. As we know, that's what the burn tool does. If you want to create highlight, you can use a dodge tool. So if I went here, see it's creating a highlight. So I can use the dodge tool also to create highlights. So again, you can create higher or lower exposure, and you can select shadows or highlights or midtones, and you can obviously play with the settings of the brush as well. So that's how you're going to create shadows and highlights. So the next thing we're going to do is work with the next fabric, so fabric number 2. So in this case, we're going to go and select the jacket trim. So I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to select the jacket trim. I can click on this button, which is add to selection mode, or I can press shift, either one will work. So add to selection mode, and then I'll add this part, I'll add this part, and I'll add this part. So remember, I have to be in the main layer to make selections. Then I'm going to create a new layer. This is going to be called jacket trim. So for jacket trim, I'm going to be using fabric number 2. So here's my fabric number 2. I'm going to go to open with Photoshop. And now I'm again going to make the fabric much smaller so I can get a smaller scale. So you can use 20% or 30%. So I'll go to image size. Resample is turned on. That's very important that this is turned on. It's very important that it says percent here, and then I'm going to say, let's say 20%, and then I'll click OK. So the next thing I have to do is set my target location with the clone stamp tool. So I'm going to use the clone stamp tool to add this texture. So I'm going to go here to select the clone stamp tool. I'm going to just make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to press Alt key, Option key. So Alt Option key, press it down, and then click in the middle. Click. And then I can go back with the jacket trim layer selected and my jacket trim selected and the marching ants showing. I can then just start sampling this fabric here. So notice how this is a little bit smaller now because I have reduced the scale to 20%, which is even more than the first fabric that I did. So I'm just going to click and drag with the clone stamp to add this texture. And also, as you're doing this, make sure that the aligned is not checked on. So make sure there's no check mark here in the aligned box. So that now allows me to start from the center every time I begin to click and drag to add this texture. So this is the second way in which you can add texture. So the first one was to edit pattern, and the second way is basically to use the clone stamp. And then once you're done, you can then add shading as I showed previously. So I can use the burn tool to add shading, make it darker, and I can use the dodge to make it lighter. And also remember, I can just simply use black color brush that is transparent and soft. And then I can add shading using the black color. If I set it to, if I'm using the brush tool, I can set it to multiply. And then it'll add up the pixels underneath. rather than paint just black on top of everything. So that's how I'm adding shading. So you've noticed that this time I actually didn't lock transparent pixels, and that's because my marching ants were on, they were active, so I didn't really even need to lock transparent pixels. But if the marching ants are not active, then you have to lock the transparent pixels so that you can only paint inside of the area that contains pixels. Good, so the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to use another technique to add the fabric. So to do that, I'm going to go to open the fabric number 3. So I'll go to right click, open with Photoshop. So now that you have fabric number 3 opened, you're going to go to use the rectangular marquee, click and drag to select the good part of the fabric, and then go to image crop. We're also going to go to image size, turn on the resample box and make this 30%, then it'll go smaller. And now I'm going to go to Command All to select all, and then Command C, which is the same as Edit Copy. I'm going to go back here, and so I already selected the waistband and the skirt, so now I can just go to Edit, Paste Special, Paste Into. So that's Edit, Paste Special, Paste Into. We'll put that fabric inside. You can also use the Move tool to move it around, and you can now also add shading here if you wish. So maybe now I'll use the multiply mode, brush, and I'll make the opacity lower, so then I can add some shading here. And then that is the third way to add fabric. The other way to add fabric would be to use the pattern clone stamp tool, but we're going to look at that later. In that case, you would have to define the pattern first, as we did for the fabric number 1, and then you would use the pattern stamp to add that pattern. So for now, these are the 3 main ways to add fabric. So I'm going to call this one skirt. So the next thing we're going to look at is how to color in the skin. And then we're going to color her skin, hair, boots, etc. So to do that, I'm going to first select all of her skin. So to be able to select, I'm going to go back to Main. I'll use the magic wand. I will click on the add to selection mode. So I'll click here, 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 and here to select her skin, and then also here and here, and the ears. Then I'm going to create a new layer, call it skin. So you can either go to edit fill, or you can use the paint bucket to fill it. Either way, but before you do that, you can just double click here, go and select the skin tone you want, and then you can either go click like that and it'll just fill, or you can just go to edit fill and it'll fill everywhere. Then if I go to Command D, that'll deselect my marching ants. So if I want to color in the skin or do some shading, then I will click on Lock Transparent Pixels. Then I can go here and pick a darker color, and then using brush set to normal, I can just go here and add some shading. Maybe I'll increase the opacity a little. So you can add shading, you can add highlight, and then keep painting until you're happy with the way it looks. You can also try with the brush set to multiply, but that might just turn it a little bit too much. But again, you will have to play with the settings, but for me, I prefer just using the normal mode when I'm shading the skin. So then keep working on that. So the next thing we're going to do is the hair, lips, and the eyes. So to do that, I'm going to go to the main layer. I'm going to select in the multiply mode the hair, lips, and her eye. And then I'll make a new layer for that. So hair, lips, I'm going to rename it. So you double click to rename it. And then you can actually, instead of using edit fill, you can just use the brush. So here I'm going to give her some hair color quick. To make it go faster, I'm going to make it go 100% opacity. And then I can color her eye. I can go select some color for her lips. And that's that. And then again, you can do some shading there as well if you want. The other thing I want to show you is how you can increase a selection a little bit if you wanted to have less of the black line visible. So you would have to go back to main, use the magic wand, select the shirt. So let's say if I wanted to have less of the black lines visible, then I would have to go to select, modify, expand. So the expand can go by 1 or 2 pixels or even 3 if you want to expand it more. So I'm going to go and say 2 pixels so the selection grows. So because the selection is bigger now, I will see less of the black outline in this case once I fill the shirt with the color in a separate layer. So here's a separate layer. I'm going to call it shirt. And then, I don't know, just some random color I can put here. And then I'm going to go to edit fill. Foreground color. And again, I could have done that with a paint bucket. So because I made the selection bigger, I got rid of the black lines and it just made the selected area bigger. So you could do that, for example, if you wanted to see less of the black lines for a particular area that you're trying to paint in. So now the last step that we have here is to work with the background. I do have a little mistake with the hair. I didn't select the piece of her hair and I didn't do the shoes, but I'm just going to keep going to not make this video too long. But in your case, you're going to want to make sure that you also color in the boots and the hair properly. So my next step is going to be to add the background. So I'm going to go to the background JPEG, open with Photoshop. I'm going to go to Command A to select all, Command C to copy. I'm going to go to Command W to close it. And then I'm going to just paste it. And then it'll come down. So depending on what active layer you had selected, the pasting will go on top of that particular layer. So clearly here I need to select my layer 1, which is the background, and drag it all the way down. So I'm going to drag it all the way down so that it looks like she is on top of it. So I'm going to double click here and call it, rename it as background. So again, you will have to drag the layer background all the way down. My next step will be to make this background layer a little bit less opaque. So I'm going to lower the opacity to 40, 50, 70, whatever you want. And then it'll become a little bit more transparent. However, now it's becoming a little bit difficult to see because I'm seeing the checker mark, a checkerboard, which indicates transparency of the main layer. So in order for you to make it easier to see, I'm going to click on the plus to create a new layer. And I'm just going to call this one, rename it as white. I'm going to select a white color. Or I could have just gone to edit fill and then selected white from here. And then I could just click OK and then the white gets filled. And then I'm going to put this underneath the background. So you drag it there. So now this helps me to properly see my background, which is 60% opacity. So now I can see better what it looks like, because if I didn't add white, it would be hard to see because it's being mixed up with a checkerboard that indicates the transparency of the main layer. So that's why I've added that white. So I recommend that you add the white at the bottom in case if your background is semi-transparent, then definitely you have to add the white layer underneath so that you can properly see what it's going to look like when it's printed. The other thing we're going to do is add drop shadow, which is optional. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, but if you do it, you have to do it in the main layer so that the drop shadow will work with her entire body. And then I could have adjusted the layers and then say okay. So this is now the drop shadow added. So now the last step would be to basically make sure you save it as a PSD, meaning Photoshop. So save as on my computer, my family name, Vanna's Croquis family name, and then it'll be a PSD Photoshop file by default. So I'm just going to say save. And then I'm done. So the same technique you can use to create your own croquis, and that'll be a part of your final project. You also may want to go back and just double check to make sure that you have cleaned up the main layer properly. In my case, I can see a little bit of dirt there, so it's probably resulting because I've added drop shadow and there's some dirty areas in the main layers. So I'm going to click and drag here with the main layer selected. Make a selection with the marquee selection tool and then hit delete. So that'll delete any dirty spots or pencil marks that I may have had in the main area, and so now it's fine. So when you're finished, you may wish to export this for Instagram or for a website or for printing. So what you would do is go to the layer menu on top and then say flatten image. So flatten image will just merge everything, and then you can go to save as. You can save it as a JPEG, for example, if you're going to put it on the Instagram, so or a website. So I'm going to save it here as a JPEG, and then I'm going to click on save. And then it's going to ask me, do I want low, medium, high, or maximum resolution? I would say you should go with high, because newer devices, newer iPads and iPhones, they have high resolution, even for on-screen viewing. So I would just export it as a high JPEG, and then I would say OK. And so then I have a JPEG of this exported, and then I can use it for email or for anything else that I want as well. The other thing that you can also do is, I'm just going to go to history and then undo this. So window, history. There we are. Yeah, so I'll go back here. So now I have all my layers. So the other thing that you can do is use the same menu, and then you can also say merge visible. So merge visible would be used if you wanted to merge only the layers that are visible and not the layers that have the visibility turned off. So if I went to merge visible, it will just merge everything because all of my layers are visible at the moment. And then I'll show you how to export it as a PDF. So a PDF format can be used to email somebody, but it can also be used for printing. So if I went to File, Save As, I can save it on my computer and select PDF version. So you'll just have to click on the Photoshop PDF here, so PDF version, and then click on Save. And then it's going to ask you what resolution you want. So if you want to save this for printing, let's say you're taking it to Kinko's, then you would save it as high quality print. If you want to save it so you can email it to somebody and you want to have a small file size, then you're going to choose the smallest file size. And then you would just basically click on Save PDF and then you're done. So let me show you here. So let's say I have to take it to Kinko's. In that case, I'm just going to save it as a high quality print and then Save PDF. And then I have it saved as a PDF for high quality printing. So then I could take this to Kinko's or any other printing service and they can print it out for me. So I recommend that you merge all the layers and save it as a PDF. and save it as a version for printing, so you can take it to a printing supplier, or even if you're printing it at the college, it might print faster and easier if you just merge all of the layers and you save it as a high quality PDF. However, make sure that you always have your Photoshop file saved as original JPEG, as original Photoshop file, so PSD file, with all of the layers. This is very important so that you can always go back and make corrections if you need to, and all of your layers will be available. So always make sure that you do not merge your layers, that you keep your original as is so you can go back to it. But for printing and for emailing, you can export it as a JPEG, you can export it as a PDF, high or low resolution PDF, and you would still have to keep your original Photoshop as is with all of its separate layers in the Photoshop PSD format, in the original format. So that's really, really important. I'm just going to show you one more example of the illustration. So here is another example of the final finished illustration, and I'm just showing you this so that you can see all of the different layers that I have as well. And here as well I have the clouds as my background, and because it's only 78% fill or lower opacity, I have included the white underneath so that it's easier to look at and easier to visualize what it's going to look like when it's printed. So that is another example. And also make sure that you have renamed all of the layers according to what's inside.